Welcome back. So let's talk about something that really affects everybody, and that is, of course, the fuel price. Now, the Automobile Association says that it's a victory for the association following Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's response in Parliament that he is considering an intervention to mitigate fuel price increases. Now, this consideration comes at the back of a petrol price increase, which rose to a record high at the beginning of this month. And fuel costs have been increasing significantly over the past few years, causing public frustration, and this primarily because petrol price increases affects all South Africans. Now, the minister's comments come amid growing calls for government not to hike fuel levies during the February budget next year. So from the AA, we are joined now by spokesperson Layton Beard, and doing so virtually. Layton, always good to speak to you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thanks, Akina. Great to be with you again.
So let's just start with the good news in terms of what the minister had to say in Parliament. Explain to us why this is actually good for us.
Look, I think it is good for us in the sense that at least we will have some clarity going forward if a review is done, that all the components that comprise the fuel price are necessary and need to be there and are calculated correctly. And that's all the AA has been asking for a very long time. When we made our presentation to Parliament in March to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources and Energy, we were asked what we could do to mitigate against the rising fuel costs. And one of the things we said that needed to happen very urgently was a review of the fuel price to determine exactly whether all the components that are part of the fuel price are A, necessary and still appropriate for South Africa, are calculated correctly, are audited correctly, and through that process, whether there was anything that we could take off that fuel price to bring it down. And I think what the minister has said in terms of let's review the fuel price or let's see what we can do in terms of the calculations, for us is a step in the right direction, because it really does answer the question that we've been asking of, can we get a review done with a view to establishing exactly what is on that fuel price and whether we can do anything about it?
So it obviously has everyone worried because of the exorbitant cost, Layton. But let's take a look at the fuel price breakdown in South Africa. How exactly is it constituted at the moment?
Well, excuse me, there's a number of different elements that go into every litre of fuel. We're talking about storage costs. We're talking about secondary storage costs. We're talking about wharfage at harbours. We're talking about transportation costs. We're talking about a number of different margins, retail margins, wholesale margins. So there's all of these things that get added to a litre of fuel in addition to the basic fuel price. So the basic fuel price is the actual price of the fuel before all of these other expenses are added to it. But then added to that as well, in South Africa, we have two very big levies. The general fuel levy, which is pegged currently at R3.93 a litre, and the road accident fund levy, which is pegged at R2.18 a litre. And together, those two levies comprise R6.11 of every litre of petrol. And that's a cause of concern. We have consistently, as the AA, been saying for the last decade at least, do not increase the levies by more than inflation. In fact, we've said don't increase those levies at all. Those levies are an easy tax for government to collect. They bring in hundreds of billions of rands a year. Together, they bring it in the region of about 110 billion rand to the fiscus every year, part of which obviously goes to the road accident fund. And therein lies another issue for the AA. We've said in terms of the road accident fund, we need to look at the management of the RAF, whether there's a need for us to privatize or semi-privatize the RAF, whether there's any interventions that can be done to make that organization more streamlined and run more efficiently. But again, the issue with the RAF is that it is as a result of South Africa's poor driving and poor road safety record that there is such a reliance on the RAF. And that's another matter that needs to be looked at. So in terms of the fuel and every litre of fuel that you purchase, there's a number of different components that go into that. The basic fuel price being the biggest, and then all these additional costs with the two levies, the RAF and the GFL, being the two and comprising around R6.11 of every litre of fuel.
And that is a lot. And the last time we spoke, we were bemoaning that. So it's just going up and up all the time. But just in terms of further mitigating factors, Layton, I was looking at your website, and very interestingly, you spoke about the RAF. Also, you speak about improved road safety. So let's talk about that, because very often we forget that all of these things that happen on our roads actually have a cost, and someone has to pay for them.
Yeah, and Sakina, I'm really glad that you've raised this issue, because unfortunately it's a topic that gets glossed over too often. The fact that South Africa has one of the highest road fatality tolls in the world is not something that we must forget. We have on average around 13,500 people that die on our roads every year, but that doesn't include the very many hundreds of thousands of people whose lives are affected by serious crashes and who, for whatever reason, cannot function as they did before they had these crashes. Now, in 2015, the Road Traffic Management Corporation released a document saying this is the cost of crashes to our economy. And they came up with a figure of 160 billion rand. And extrapolated since then, we're probably looking at around about 195 billion with a B a year. That is what it costs this government, every taxpayer, because of the crashes that we have in our country. Now translate that to what the Road Accident Fund needs to pay to compensate victims of crashes. And you can already see that that's a huge amount of money. So our view is that improved road safety in South Africa is going to have a positive effect, not only on the economy, it's going to have a positive effect on the RAF, and it may and it should have a positive effect down the line on the petrol price, because the reliance on the RAF is not going to be as severe as it is currently. You ask about other mitigating factors, Sakina. One of the other things the AA says needs to happen as a matter of urgency is that we need to reduce our reliance on road freight in South Africa. What is happening with Transnet? Can we improve the rail network to ensure that goods can be transported across the country via rail network? What about effective, sustainable, affordable, and safe public transport? That is something else that needs to happen. What are we doing in terms of non-motorized transport? In other words, getting people on bicycles or walking, and how are we creating an environment that is conducive to that? We may not think about it, but all of these factors at the end of the day will have a positive knock-on effect on the fuel price. And it's things that we've got to be thinking about and talking about. So I agree totally. We think there are many things the government needs to do. And I think the fact that the Minister of Finance has said that a review is something that's on the table or that he's considering, even though the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy says it's not going to happen, for us, that's a step in the right direction. It's a positive development. We'd like to see where this eventually ends up, and hopefully the Minister of Finance touches on this in his budget speech in February.
So, Layton, speaking about road maintenance and the upkeep of the infrastructure, so I've often wondered when there's been a crash on the road, and let's say the side barrier is damaged, or you've got a traffic light taken out, whether it's through an accident or a vandalism of some kind, who pays for that, and how is it paid for?
It's a very complicated answer. I'm not sure I have the answer entirely, but obviously that needs to come out of provincial and municipal budgets. They need to be paying for these repairs. They need to be paying for this upkeep. If you look at a province like Gauteng, for instance, they've got a budget in the region of about 8 to 10 billion rand a year, and they need to be spending that money on the upkeep, and they need to be making sure that there is sufficient cleanup after accidents. One of the things that the AA talks about in terms of its safe systems approach to road safety is better post-crash intervention. And that relates to helping survivors of crashes and helping victims of crashes and making sure that they are treated properly. But it also entails proper cleanup afterwards. So there needs to be budget for that, and it needs to be made. There needs to be provision in municipal and provincial budgets. And certainly I think that that's something that requires also a lot of attention.
And then there's, of course, the currency, the rand dollar, and that fluctuation, and, of course, the oil price being pegged at dollar level. Let's talk to that. And how much can realistically be done about that?
Well, I think that's part of the conversation that we think needs to be had, Sakina. I mean, we can tell you exactly what our thoughts are on that, but I think, we may only touch on one or two aspects of it. Look, in terms of the Rand-US dollar exchange rate, our view has always been that a conducive economy, an economy that is open for investment, that welcomes investment, that wants investors to come to it and creates an environment where that can happen, is going to be positive for the Rand. An economy which is strong is going to lead to employment. An economy which is strong is going to lead to very many different things. And that is one of the things we say will lead to an improved exchange rate against the greenback, which at the moment is one of the mitigating factors or mitigating factors for, extenuating factors for the rising fuel price. The increase we saw of 75 cents going into December was wholly as a result of the fact that the Rand was weak against the US dollar. In terms of international oil prices, very little the South African government can do about that. Obviously, that's a price that's pegged on the international market and is, at the mercy of geopolitical developments, international geopolitical developments. And even though the oil price came down in November, it was that weak Rand that pushed us to see what is known as an under recovery, and therefore we're going to have to pay more. So the government, in our view, needs to create an environment locally which is economic, which looks at economic progress, which looks at the upliftment of the economy in order to improve the value of the Rand against the US dollar. Things such as the civil unrest in July certainly don't help. There's very many things along the way that are also concerning, but it's that environment that the government has control over. You ask me, what else does the government have control over in terms of the fuel price? Let's review that fuel price. Let's look at those components. Let's look at all the processes that go into that. Maybe by doing that, we will get some clearer answers.
Indeed, because I think that perhaps now more than ever is something that needs to be looked at. You spoke about, the price going down sometimes. And the question here is, how come it never goes down by as much as it goes up?
Now, that's obviously, determined by the currency and the international markets. We have seen, decreases of around 50 or 60 cents, but certainly nothing to the likes of, 1 Rand 20 or 75 cents increases, as we've seen over the last 2 months, for instance. So it's a very valid question. And again, it has to do with those two big factors you mentioned, the value of the Rand against the US dollar and that international oil price. Certainly, I think during COVID, when we saw, the value of oil dip really, really low, we did see fuel prices in South Africa go to very, very low rates. I don't think you'll see that again. But it really has to do with the fact that we pegged at a certain level at the moment, and anything going forward has to be measured against what we have at the moment. And for that reason, I don't think we'll see the decreases to the scale of what we're seeing the increases.
And that hurts, of course, even 100%. Though, the reasons are valid, but it still hurts. Then, Layton, of course, we have the fuel price adjustment on the first Wednesday of every month. But as the AAU usually give us a mid-month and, of course, then closer to that time, another forecast. So let's talk about what you are forecasting at the moment. It's just about mid-month. Anything that you can tell us at this point what to expect?
Sadly, no, Sakina. And the reason for that is that the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy has stopped publishing its daily updates, both via email and on its website, to people like the AA who received that. So we only know now at the end of the month when the announcement is made what that increase or decrease is going to be. So effectively, the DMRE is withholding that information from the public of South Africa. It's something we're very concerned about. We have engaged with the department about that very issue, saying that we provide a service to the citizens of this country, where we look at that fuel price on a daily basis and see which way it's moving, with a view to informing the public of South Africa. The DMRE doesn't see it that way. We only get that announcement now at the end of the month, as I said, when that announcement is made. We're very concerned about this development. We feel it is a form of censorship, and it is something that we are taking forward. So in answer to your question very briefly is no, I can't give you an outlook right now.
That's very curious, given that, there wasn't a problem all along, all these years, and all of a sudden, you withhold that information, which just doesn't make sense. Hopefully there'll be an answer forthcoming. But then, of course, there was also the recent embarrassment about the fuel price miscalculation, and which saw consumers pay more than the already exorbitant increase. And who should take responsibility for that, and how should government make up for that blunder?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, Sakina. I mean, obviously the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy has to take accountability for that, and I think that they have. And I applaud the fact that they made the correction as soon as they discovered the mistake. And they did it very quickly, and they made sure that everybody was aware of that. So you've got to give them credit for that, and we certainly do. I think for us, the issue is that an error was made in the first place. A lot of people are coming up to me and saying, you know what, Layton, it was only a 6 cents error. Why are you guys, going on about this? Well, the fact is that it's not about the 6 cents. It's about the fact that an error was made in the first place, and we cannot ignore that. Our concern is that if an error like that creeps in, I mean, you spoke earlier about the fact that, they've been going on for years giving us the fuel price. What has changed since then? We've been doing the fuel price announcements for the last decade without any issues, without any communication from government saying that there was a problem. When this error was discovered, government said it's the first time ever that they've had this type of an error. First time that they stopped publishing the daily updates, first time that there's an error, is there a correlation? I'll leave that in your hands. Certainly, from our point of view, the fact that there was an error justifies a call for a review of the fuel price that is transparent and that involves civil society in terms of looking and auditing at those numbers. And for us, that is where the issue is. There was an error, and it can't happen again ever. And we think that underscores the need for us to relook at that fuel price and all its elements going forward.
All, very confusing if you think about it, Layton. The AA earlier this year asked to present before Parliament's Portfolio Committee their proposals on how to mitigate against these fuel price increases. Then suddenly you stop getting information from government to continue providing the service that you have been for many years. But just in terms of government's feedback on your inputs to the Portfolio Committee, what has that been? Very muted.
When we were on the committee itself, the most important question from some of the MPs was, where do we source our information and why do we publish it twice monthly? That seemed to be more concerning to some of those MPs than the meat of what we had to say. Now, we've always sourced the data, and we've never, ever shied away from that. In fact, it's in every press release we've ever spoken about on this issue from the Central Energy Fund's website. Those are the official numbers that come from government, and they were updated, as I said, on a daily basis, no longer. The response has been muted, which is why, again, what the Minister of Finance had to say about this review for us is extremely exciting, because it's something that we've been asking for a very, very long time. And so the fact that it may be on the table and may actually happen, certainly for us is vindication of the fact that we've said that there is a need for it. And if one of the most senior members in cabinet says, yes, let's do that, we believe we're on the right track in calling for it.
Well, Layton, always good to speak to you. Thanks so much for your time. The Automobile Association spokesperson, Layton Beard, as speaking to us about the organisation, saying it's a victory for South Africans following Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's response in Parliament that he actually considers an intervention to mitigate the fuel price increases. And, of course, the eating of the pudding, the taste, or as they say, is in the eating. So we'll wait to see whether this actually happens. With that, of course,